In 333 BC, Alexander the Great was no longer just an ambitious young king from Macedon. He had already crossed into Asia, defeated Persian forces at Granicus, and begun to prove that the Empire of Persia was not invincible. But Granicus had been only the beginning. There, Alexander had defeated regional commanders. At Issus, he would face something far greater. For the first time, the war would become personal. Darius III, King of Kings, ruler of the Persian Empire, had come in person to stop him. This changed everything. No longer was Alexander fighting governors on the edge of empire. Now he was facing the emperor himself, the man who ruled the largest and richest state in the known world. And Darius did not come alone. He gathered a massive army, drawing together cavalry, infantry, royal guards, and Greek mercenaries fighting in Persian service. To many observers, this should have been the moment the Macedonian advance finally ended. Alexander was bold, brilliant even. But now he was marching toward the full weight of Persia. The deeper he pushed into Asia, the more dangerous the campaign became. And yet, Alexander kept moving. He believed speed would save him. He believed hesitation would only give Persia time to become stronger. So both kings advanced, each searching for the moment that would decide the war. The campaign that led to Issus was shaped as much by movement as by combat. At first, Alexander and Darius were not standing face to face. They were maneuvering, searching, trying to outposition one another. Darius had assembled a huge army, and in open terrain, its sheer size could have overwhelmed the Macedonians. That was where many expected the decisive battle to take place. But the campaign did not unfold so neatly. In a dramatic turn, Darius moved behind Alexander's line of advance and appeared near Issus, threatening his rear and cutting his connection to the north. This was a bold move, and for a moment, it placed Alexander in real danger. If he marched the wrong way, if he reacted too slowly, he could be trapped between terrain and enemy numbers. But Darius had also created a problem for himself. By shifting into the region near Issus, he had brought his giant army into a place where it could not spread out properly. The battlefield there was narrow. Mountains pressed down from one side. The sea lay on the other. Between them stretched only a limited strip of land. What looked at first like a strategic success would become a trap of geometry. The Persian king had found Alexander, but he had also brought his own army into ground that erased much of its advantage. At Issus, numbers alone would not be enough. Discipline, timing, and battlefield control would matter more. The field at Issus was one of the most important fighters in the battle. That may sound strange, but ancient battles were often decided long before the first spear struck. The shape of the ground mattered. The room to maneuver mattered. The space to deploy cavalry, to extend a line, to rotate reserves, to exploit numbers, all of this mattered. And at Issus, the terrain was working against Darius. His army was larger, probably much larger. He had more men, more cavalry, more prestige, and more resources. On a wide open plain, those advantages might have surrounded and crushed the Macedonians. But here, the narrow ground compressed everything. Too many men were forced into too little space. Large sections of the Persian force could not operate with full effectiveness. A king who came to overpower his enemy with size found that size turning into congestion. Alexander recognized this immediately. He understood that Issus gave him something precious, a chance to fight the Persian Empire without being drowned by its numbers. So he prepared carefully. The Macedonian phalanx formed the center, dense with long sarissas, disciplined, experienced, and built to absorb punishment. The cavalry wings were placed for movement and decision, and as always, Alexander himself took position on the right. That mattered, because Alexander rarely fought as a passive observer. He fought looking for the decisive point, the moment where speed and violence could collapse an enemy line. Across from him, Darius stood in the Persian center, surrounded by royal guards, with the authority of empire around him. This was not only a military contest, it was a test of nerves. One king needed to stop the invader. The other needed to prove he could defeat the great king in person. Between the two armies ran the Pinarus River. It was not enormous, but it was enough to complicate every movement. A river did not need to be deep to be dangerous. It broke formation. It slowed momentum. It exposed men as they crossed. And it created confusion at the exact moment when order mattered most. When the battle began, the Macedonians had to force themselves forward against Persian resistance along the riverbank. This was the hardest kind of opening. Men were trying to advance, hold shields, keep rank, and survive impact, all while crossing broken ground and entering close combat under pressure. The first collision was savage. The Macedonian center came under real strain. Persian troops, including experienced Greek mercenaries fighting for Darius, pressed hard against them. For a time, the battle looked dangerously balanced. This is important. Issus was not a simple story of Alexander charging once and everything collapsing around him. There was hard fighting at the center. There was pressure. There was confusion. There were moments when the issue was not yet clear. Men fell at the waterline, in the mud, and in the crush of spears and shields. The noise, the splashing, the pushing mass of bodies, the disorientation of the crossing, all of it created exactly the sort of chaos that could destroy an advancing army. And yet the Macedonians did not break. They bent. They struggled. But they held. That endurance mattered because it gave Alexander time to do what he always wanted to do: find the opening that would decide the battle. On the Macedonian right, Alexander saw what he had been waiting for. He identified weakness, or at least vulnerability, in the Persian line, and then he struck. Leading the companion cavalry, he launched a violent attack with speed, precision, and personal aggression. This was not merely an attempt to push Persian troops backward. It was aimed at something far more important. Alexander was driving toward the Persian center, toward the place where Darius himself stood. That was the heart of the army, and everyone knew it. In ancient warfare, armies were not machines. They were emotional systems. Prestige mattered. Visibility mattered. Confidence mattered. And the presence of the king could hold an entire army together. But if danger reached the king, fear could spread with shocking speed. Alexander understood that perfectly. So while the center of the battlefield was still locked in hard combat, he transformed the right wing into the decisive weapon of the day. The charge was brutal. Horsemen crashed forward. Dust rose. Armor flashed. Persian resistance began to splinter under concentrated pressure. And as the Macedonians moved closer to the royal center, the psychological balance of the battle shifted. The danger was no longer abstract. It was moving toward Darius. For the Persian king, this was the crisis. He had come to stop Alexander. He had come to display imperial power. He had come to crush a rising enemy beneath the weight of empire. Instead, The enemy king was driving straight toward him. What happened next became one of the defining moments of the war. Darius turned away from the fight. Whether that decision came in one instant of panic or through a rapidly growing realization that the center could not hold, the effect was the same. Once the great king withdrew, the battle changed completely. At that moment, Persia was no longer fighting to win. It was fighting to survive the collapse. When Darius fled, the cohesion of the Persian army began to unravel. Retreat spread into panic, and the same narrow terrain that had limited Persian strength before the battle now made the defeat even worse. Too many men, too little room, too much confusion. Units could not withdraw cleanly. Rear movement became disorder. The sense that the king had abandoned the field hit morale like a weapon. Some parts of the Persian army still fought hard. The Greek mercenaries in particular were dangerous opponents, and the fighting did not instantly end everywhere at once. But the battle as a whole had already been decided. The royal center had failed. The king had left. And with that, Alexander had won one of the most important victories of his career. The consequences went far beyond the field itself. Issus was not just a tactical success, it was a political earthquake. Alexander had defeated Darius in person. He had shown the world that the great king could be beaten, driven from battle, and stripped of the image of invincible royal power. That mattered enormously. Victories do not only kill soldiers, they destroy confidence. And Issus shattered Persian prestige. The aftermath deepened that shock. Alexander captured the Persian royal camp, with its wealth, its luxury, and its symbols of imperial status. Even more dramatically, members of Darius's own family were left behind and fell into Alexander's hands. This was not merely loot, it was a statement. The king of Macedon, the outsider from the west, had broken through the shell of Persian greatness and touched the household of empire itself. Strategically, the victory opened the road south. Syria, Phoenicia, the eastern Mediterranean coast, all now lay vulnerable to Alexander's advance, and from there, the path deeper into the Persian world would continue. Issus did not end the war. Darius still lived. Persia was still vast, and greater battles still lay ahead. But Issus changed the meaning of the campaign. After this, Alexander was no longer simply raiding imperial territory. He was dismantling imperial authority. The young king from Macedon had faced the ruler of Persia, and the ruler of Persia had turned away. That memory would echo across the ancient world. And from that narrow field between mountain and sea, Alexander stepped closer to becoming a legend.